All right, David. Well, I appreciate you taking the time here to join me real briefly. I know you're at a horse show, you got clients with you, and you're a part of the industry like the rest of us, but you also represent and have founded an organization called Western Justice. And for those of you guys that are listening that have not heard of Western Justice is a 501c3 nonprofit that represents the Western way of life. And they actually go to the extent that they represent our lifestyle and what we do and what we love to do with horses on a political action level where they're actually working with legislators on the state and federal level to be able to preserve this way of life, to preserve the events like the horse show that David's at this weekend. We're at a bit of a crossroads right now. We have an election coming up in just a couple of days. And that's exactly why I wanted to, and I asked David to sit down for a very quick conversation about this, because at the end of the day, we're looking at not just two different presidents, but we're looking at two different administrations. And my question, David, to you is we're looking at who could be running this country. What are the differences that you're looking at in the potential future of the horse industry from a political level of what we might be voting for, essentially, is what we're getting down to, right? If we pick one administration over the administration, how does that impact the horse industry for the next 4 years and maybe for the rest of our lives if certain things get passed?
Well, it's very clear. There's one with the Trump administration, we go on offense, and we're able to bring roll back a bunch of regulations that are causing problems for us that the animal rights groups have infiltrated. So there's two different tactics. We have an offensive tactic with Trump, and we have a very defensive tactic if Kamala gets in there. Because what's happening right now, real quickly, one of the big things that's happening right now is in February, if these bureaucrats and the people in APHIS and USDA get their way, the Horse Protection Act, you're going to have a register every horse show with the USDA within 30 days of the horse show, prior to the horse show, which means that they can come out, and if you aren't registered, they can shut your show down. And if you are, they can send inspectors out. So what started off as the Horse Protection Act and the PACT Act to stop soaring for Tennessee walkers, which has been done for 30 years, is what we've been singing and I've been screaming to the hilltops about, is that we're going to end up with, having inspections at every horse show. And if you can imagine waiting in line, and Tennessee walking horse shows are really small, right? So,
And correct
and
me if
there's
I'm
times,
wrong with the Horse Protection Act, but that actually goes into effect in certain areas February 1st of next year, like
yeah,
2025. It's already there
yeah,
where and they're saying with that, you have to register your horse show 30 days in advance. And if you don't, you can't put it on. If you do put it on, you could get fined significantly for doing that. And then the pattern, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong off basis here, but this is what I've put together from listening to you and doing my own research, is that when we look at what happened to horse slaughter, which was they didn't ban horse slaughter, right? They just removed the funding of the USDA inspectors. And
right.
what they've done now is they're saying we have to register events with the USDA and they get to decide if they're going to have a USDA inspector at our horse shows. And so they may or may not at certain shows, bigger shows, we could assume it'd be like a ring steward. They would have an inspector there, which is going to be a nightmare in itself. But if they pull the funding from the USDA inspectors like they did the slaughter plants, then we may not be able to allow to have horse shows at all, not because they made horse shows illegal, but because they pulled the funding from the inspectors and now we have nobody to inspect our horse shows. Is
Right.
that
And
fair?
that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. It's a it's a scary deal, and it sounds almost like it couldn't happen, but we never thought a lot of the things that have happened. So with that, this all happened in this last administration. So we've been fighting off the PACT Act for 12, 14 years. And the historically, the Republicans have always been on our side on the animal rights stuff. And the Democrats are high on the list as being humane legislators for the Humane Society. So they have a way higher score of doing the bidding of the animal rights groups who are trying to take our lifestyle away. They think we're a bunch of Neanderthals riding horses, and it's time to. I mean, if you just look at some of the comments that come in on our fight in LA about, the rodeo ban, some of the comments, people talk about antiquated cowboys need to get, there's no use for them anymore, and there's all kinds of foul stuff that gets said about cowboys and horsemen and all of that. So it's abuse, no matter what you think, or what how nice, however nice you are to your animal, they still think it's abuse. And these people are coming for us, and they're very, very incremental. They work very slowly, and they've done a great job of just picking away, picking away, picking away. One little thing here and there. And if you think just because it sounds like it couldn't happen, that it's not going to happen, look back at some of the things that have happened. I mean, they're going after all our zoos now, but Ringling Brothers is gone, the circuses are gone. That all started off, nobody thought it was going to happen. Furs, fur coats, they're trying to go after felt. I mean, in Colorado right now, if they pass this proposition they got going on there, it'll ban felt hats.
Hmm.
So your cowboy hat is going to be gone. I mean, you won't be able to buy one in Colorado. And they tried that in California. They tried it in Oregon. We got it stopped in Oregon. Whoever would have thought you wouldn't be able to buy a dog or a cat at a pet store? A registered dog or cat at a pet store. Well, they banned all that in many states. And if you think back to 2004, 5, 6, that's when they started coining the phrase puppy mills. So now, what's the common thing that people say? They've said it enough times and use that word puppy mill. Everybody thinks it refers to a dog breeder. Even if you're a legitimate dog breeder, you're a puppy mill.
Right.
And that's a negative connotation that the animal rights groups have started. And that's what they're doing with rodeo. They're trying to come after rodeo and come after the horse industry. Tennessee walkers were the low hanging fruit. They went after them. And, it's shame on us. The rest of the horse industry didn't stand up for the Tennessee walking world and say, hey, you guys need to get your shit straightened out where, and police your own, before they started regulating them through USDA.
100%. So you mentioned earlier that with a Trump administration, you're able to go on the offensive and start to get rid of some of the things that have been passed legally. And then on the contrary, then my assumption is that if the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz get elected, then we're on the defensive to try to minimize the amount of progress that the animal rights activists could be made. So can you share in like maybe as much detail as you can what types of things we would be facing if Kamala Harris and Tim Walz get elected? What are the type of things of the agenda that they're pushing? Like, I know obviously they're trying to get us to not be able to ride horses, own horses, all of those types of things. But is there anything that's like pressing right now? You have the LA ban, which on a state level, is there anything pressing that you're like, man, this is a big red flag. If these guys get in, this is what we're potentially facing?
Well, the EID, the electronic devices for cattle, that's a big one for the horse show industry. And people haven't even, you don't see anybody talking about that yet. But the EID mandate, if that goes through, then that's going to affect all cattle events, all events with cattle or livestock events like rodeo and bull riding. It's going to affect everybody.
And
And
that's the tracking process of tagging those
yeah,
calves with electronic tags so they can track it from the time it hits the ground till the time it goes to a slaughter plant,
yeah.
correct?
There's a lot of people that are really against that and been against that for a long time. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Some people will sit there and say, "Oh, that sounds like a good plan and it works good," but they're going to make it mandatory. If you want to be a producer and you want to voluntarily do that because it works for your program, great. But it should not ever be mandated. Plus, it's going to mandate all those guys that bring cattle to horse shows and all of that. It's going to cause major issues at horse shows, and people aren't even thinking about that yet. I mean, people haven't even brought that up and started really going, working that through their mind.
Well, I mean, you look at the just a systematic control of if they say they all cattle have to have these vaccinations or you can't haul cattle more than this amount of mileage, and they are actually have an electronic tag on them to prove that you've hauled those cattle X number of miles and we're going to tax you for all those miles, or you
Exactly.
didn't actually give them these vaccinations or whatever the case is, then the government is now able to control and fine these farmers and ranchers for something through this controlling it, right? And it's this is a
Yes.
capitalistic society. We
It's
should be able to make our own damn decisions as business owners and consumers.
yeah. If it's a health issue, that's a different thing, right? I mean, if it's you got BSE or some crazy thing going on, that's a different situation. And but as far as making your own decisions, not the electronic identification, but these guys are getting taxed and dealt with on all this movement. How are we going to afford cattle at a horse show? How are these guys going to be able to do that with all the cattle? I mean, you go to one cutting. I know of one cutting in Central Oregon that runs about 1,500 head or more through that show in a week. Or actually, I shouldn't say 1,500. It's more like 4,000 head that run through that in a week. So that's a lot of extra money, a lot of extra time, a lot of extra problems.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's just one of the things. This deal with APHIS and USDA on the inspections, that's probably the number one thing to me right now is that because I've watched this progress and come on for, you know, the last 12, 14 years. And now it's actually happening. And it happened under this administration. And it was because they have a bunch of sympathetic people in there. And if we don't have people in USDA that have common sense and understand the horse industry, because we are the largest recreational entity in the United States. And a lot of people don't understand that. We are far outweigh financially any other group out there. And that's, you know, motorcycles, dirt bikes, boats, all that stuff. I mean, we are the biggest group out there. And nobody, no, a lot of people don't, I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot of people don't have any clue. And I know the politicians don't. So all the politicians that are making these rules and then the bureaucrats that do the rulemaking, and see that's where my job comes in the rulemaking, where we do a lot of our work, especially in the first Trump administration. We were able to be right on board in meetings and doing things because we were allowed to be there. This administration's kept us out. So, we got to use lobbyists to go poke around at things. We can't find things out like we normally could as far as, and it's nothing that's illegal or whistleblower. But those guys, without a FOIA request, we can't find out what in the hell they're doing.
Mm. And so,
And
I mean, in that instance, I mean, the difference in two administrations is whether our Western way of life has a seat at the table or not in this
exactly,
instance,
yeah,
right? Because if the last 4 years you guys are having to use back doors in a transparent way, like if they use a FOIL Act and you're having to go through all these other steps to even be heard,
right,
nonetheless, actually be able to stand up for our way of life versus we're looking at Trump Pence era, you were able to have a direct line into some of those key players to where when you needed to have conversations, you could. And if, you know, the point isn't necessarily here to tell people who to vote for, but the point here is for people to understand what the cause and effect is for our Western way of life with these two different administrations. And if we're looking at, hey, a Trump Vance presidency, and you're like, hey, we're going to hit the ground running. Trump's already privately owned or privately funded his own transition team to make sure that they can hit the ground running should they win on Tuesday. Then that's obviously a key thing that we need to be aware of.
yeah, and they're the transition team. I know those guys, so they've already been alerted to some of these things. I've actually had phone calls with them, and I can say all that, but I'm just not going to name any names or anything like that. But I've had conversations with the transition team already, and wanting to know what priorities what the highest priority on down to the first five things that need to be done. And the number one thing, and it's on their agenda because this Horse Protection Act deal takes effect in February. The number one thing on their list is to deal with the horse deal, and they're already making phone calls and talking. And the transition teams are good. They can talk to people and find things out, and because a lot of the embedded bureaucrats, um, the career people, they're talking to both sides right now. They're in there already, saying what's priority, what we're going to do, all of that. And USDA is becoming a funnel for money,
Hmm.
and that's gonna stop. I mean, there's a lot of things that will stop if the Trump administration is there, and there's a lot of things they're trying to start these wildlife corridors and start throwing a bunch of money at wildlife corridors. We fought the big Ventura wildlife corridor that Yvon Chouinard, who is the biggest eco terrorist out there, as far as I'm concerned. He owns Patagonia
Okay.
and founded Patagonia, the clothing line. So he's out there pushing these uh, wildlife corridors that we're going to make the Santa Monica Mountains a wildlife corridor that would connect to the Los Padres Mountains, which is goes all through the valley. Northridge, Ventura, all of that goes right through the valley, where people couldn't have a light on outside after 10 o'clock. They couldn't have a fence over a certain height. They had to. I mean, it was so the rules and the things that they're trying to do are so silly. But then you got people like we're fight up there in Montana right now with the prairie situation. That all of that stuff is going to go hog wild in a Kamala administration, and they're going to dump money towards it, and the money just goes. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, well, the Trump administration is going to be rolling things back. The EPA, you look at WOTUS on the EPA, the Waters of the United States. I don't know, I don't know how much it affects anything out east, but out west, the Waters of the United States is a huge deal here because they come after people with a pond that's on their place in the what out on 44,000 acres. There's a temporary pond during the year that they water stock they use for a stock watering pond, and they're trying to say that's waters of the United States. The waters of the United States was never designed for that. It was supposed to be navigable waters from the ocean only. The left has basically weaponized the waters of the United States to go after people all over. I mean, it's a control issue, and it's a really bad deal. So
Well, you're looking at power, control, and money, right? And whether it's the tagging devices on cattle, where that's going to be a financial thing, where they're going to charge you for all the cattle that you have registered in the system and charge you for these fees, or they're controlling water. They control the food system, control the water. And I think what you were just kind of summarizing there, probably a little bit unintentionally, but is look at Trump administration within the horse industry is we have certain regulations like that pass act that's coming up in February that will hopefully be deregulated and it'll go away and we're going to have a backing off on those regulations to allow a free
well,
marketplace to do what we need
well
to do.
the big thing is everybody tries to say, oh well, it only affects Tennessee Walkers or the gaited horses, and that's what it's mandated. They don't have authority to go after other shows. But I just got a good friend of mine was just at the Morgan International show, and she said that there was USDA veterinary inspectors there. That's not a that's not a gaited horse. It's not it's
Yep.
not somebody that they use soaring for or try to do any of that. So why were they there? Why were they at that show? So if you think that they're not coming for the cuttings, which will devastate a cutting, a reining, or a cow horse show, or a team roping or a barrel race, it'll devastate those. Because if you have to sit in line and then they see a pimple or a scratch or something on the legs, they disqualify you from being able to show your horse or run your horse.
Yeah, and
And
I think that this isn't, I mean, we're talking about, we're talking about potentially bigger horse shows. I think is where people's mind goes to this is like, oh, this is a big cutting or a big reining show. But this is, they didn't define that. It's written so vaguely that it's any horse show. And so it's
Any
like if
horse.
you're having a little barn weekend where the local barns come together and have a little horse show, you've still got to register that thing 30 days in advance. And you've got to follow all these regulations. And it's not just going to stop at horse shows, it's going to be events, all types of horse events, clinics, all of us that teach clinics around the country. Any kind probably they can even probably boil it down to a gathering. Do you have to do that
Yeah.
for a group lesson? Like, how are they going to define that? Because they're going to, if it's written super vaguely, what are we going to do, right? Like now we're all lumped
That's
into this regulation, and people think like, well, I don't go to major horse shows. It's not about that. It's about horse events
yeah.
that
Anyway,
have to be registered and paid to be registered.
and there'll be people who do it without doing it, and they'll try to get away with it, and then they'll get fined, or they'll somebody will find out, or maybe they'll go under the radar for a couple of years. But the problem is, they said these bureaucrats will say that it only affects the Tennessee Walkers or those kind of horses. But in the Horse Protection Act, which this falls under, it states in there that the Horse Protection Act covers every horse, domestic horse in the United States, and it says it 4 times. So it's uh it's all in the wording. All these little things like that come back and bite you. And these bureaucrats, what happens is after a law is made, then it goes into that committee or that group, and the bureaucrats are the ones, these staffers and these bureaucrats who don't have any, most of the time, don't have any practical on the job knowledge of the situation. They're the ones that do all the rulemaking. Well, then they go and convince everybody to sign off on in the committee to sign off on those rules. But if we're not at the table, I sat in a meeting a couple years. It's been several years now, but the head veterinarian at USDA said he could see where riding a horse could be considered an act of soaring. And I mean, if we weren't in the room, our group wasn't in the room, and I wasn't there, we would have been screwed big time, because that would have went in there. And who's gonna police that, for one? What kind of a stupid program would that be for the USDA to have out there? And right now, you get a Trump administration, and they're going to cut all these dumb programs out that don't mean anything and aren't you can't physically deal with them or financially deal with them. They're going to cut all that stuff out and redo it. And then with the Kamala administration, the Democrats just want to keep throwing money at things. They just keep throwing money and throwing money. So
100%. Yeah, and it's like we were just saying that riding a horse could be an act of soaring. And the important thing for people to realize there is that soaring is illegal. They've made that very
yeah,
clear that it
it's a
is illegal to
felony.
soar horses. And when the lead veterinarian at USDA goes, well, soaring is equal to riding, that's what that guy is saying, and therefore it's a synonymous term, and therefore all of it could therefore become illegal and no longer can put a saddle on the back of our horses and ride. At this point, it is almost dumbfounding to think that we are this close and that this is a potential situation that's facing it. But one of the biggest reasons I want to talk to you, because there's a sense of urgency that our industry has to have to actually take action on these things. Obviously, through Western Justice, y'all are representing us on a legal matter, but you guys have to have support from the public. That's how you guys are able to do what you guys do in order to work with these lobbyists and work with these legislators to make sure that we don't end up in a pickle. And so, what do people need to know about supporting Western Justice and how they can do that, and where they can basically keep up with you guys?
Well, so to correct your first intro line, we have a 501c4, which is our legislative fund, and a 501c3, which is our educational and our legal. It's our nonprofit. And a C4 is a nonprofit, but it's not a tax deductible nonprofit. So if you donate to the C4, you become a member. That's not a tax deduction unless you consider it dues and business expense that way. And you can deduct it that way. But I defer to your accountant on that. not I'm not an accountant, but the C3 is a foundations can give to that. That's where we do all of our legal stuff, all of our educational stuff goes through the C3. I want to build a legal fund for people who get in trouble because all across where I live, all across the West, there's been people, hundreds of ranchers over the last 20 years have gone out of business and just disappeared. Their grounds gone, their leases have gone back to the government, whatever, because they couldn't afford to fight a battle that came from DOJ or a state level or whatever. And there's great organizations out there, Mountain States Legal Foundation out of Colorado and Pacific Legal Foundation out of California, that will step in once it gets to the Supreme Court or the district court, like or circuit court, like Ninth Circuit or 10th Circuit. They'll step in and help out there, and they'll fund it, and they have a big legal fund that they do that if they take your case. But these ranchers, the problem is, for one, they don't know where to go, they don't know who to talk to, they get overwhelmed by legal fees or the thought of the cost of the legal fees, and they just walk away. And that's either they go broke and walk away, or they have to sell their place, or they have to do something like that, just go away because they can't fight it and they don't know how. So that's what I want to build, a legal fund and that can go right through our C3. So that's through any foundation, any of that can put money into that legal fund that will help for us to be able to help protect some of these people that are having a hard time. There maybe, some rancher that's got 100 cows and he's got, doesn't have a lot of extra money, or he's just getting going, and they come in and try to put him out of business. We can go in and legally help them through that. So to get to that next level, at least if it goes that way, like, we didn't have to go that way with the J Spear Ranch. We saved them from a DOJ lawsuit. We did that on our own. Saved them from a $35 million lawsuit from the DOJ. And that was a big ranch here in Oregon. So we were able to prove the DOJ was wrong and get them out of their hair. So that was one that was going to put them, their ranch out of business. So we're able to do that stuff, but we need help. I mean, I can't do it all. I can't be everything to everyone and not have the funds, because we just don't have the extra funds to do all that. There's so much apathy, or people, the problem with our world right now is people a lot of times they don't get involved until they're involved. They don't realize how bad it's going to be when they're involved. And if there's not somebody like Western Justice out there's a lot of other things I could be doing to make money and have a lot less stress in my life. And, but I do enjoy what I do for sure. But there's we need the money to be able to do it. And Western Justice, our C4 is a membership based. And I mean, if I had 100,000 members, even at the lowest level of $25 a piece, that's a lot. That's a lot of money to do what we do. So we need to, I I tell people all the time, because they ask me, how do you fight back against the all these animal rights groups, environmental groups that are getting billions of dollars cumulatively between all of them a year to fight us? And I'd say, it takes a lot of money to build a lie over years, but it takes very little money to tell the truth. And that's what we have. We have the truth, but we have to be able to go have at least enough money to go get that truth out there.
And I mean, you made the point earlier, right, that the Western way of life, as a recreational or even as a professional, people that enjoy this way of life, is far greater than any other demographic out there. And it's one of those things that I'm really big. We can't assume that other people are just going to take care of this for us, right? You guys are out fighting the good fight to try to keep this alive, but there's those of everyone within this industry and as many of this people that this reaches, that we actually got to actually put our money where our mouth is and get behind
Right.
organization like Western Justice, because 100,000 people at $25 a person is is a drop in the bucket for the amount of horse people that are out there that trail ride, that
Yes.
enjoy their horses for fun, that ranch. Like it doesn't, it takes anyone that's listening to this to actually go to y'all's website, which is westernjustice.info, and actually become a member and put the action behind the words. Because if we don't, the talk is cheap. And
Right.
these other organizations, and we've heard this, especially the last couple of months, of people saying like there's more of us than there are of them, and this is so true. There are way more of us than there are animal rights activists that are with an evil agenda. There's way more of us than them. But the difference is that they're throwing their money into these greedy corporate organizations that are actually fighting against us, versus where we're assuming that this is all just going to be okay and we're not going to lose the American way of life because the American West was built on horseback, and we can't be so naive.
And one of the points I want to make real quick too is that the American Horse Council is supposed to be the DC, protector of the horse industry. The Western horse represents about what I consider the Western horse. Consider is it represents about close to 80% of the domestic horse in the United States. The Horse Council is run by and managed by the Jockey Club, which is 3% of the horse industry. And they do not have our best interest in mind. They're more worried about the racetracks and their stuff and the feel good part. And they're spending a lot of money to promote agendas that are not the same as us in the Western world. And we have not had good representation in DC until I was at Protect the Harvest. And then now with Western Justice, when I left Protect the Harvest in 2020, now with Western Justice, we are the only people that are trying to protect the Western horse. And like you alluded to, started talking about, if you put together, and I tell people this all the time, you put together ranching, the Western horse world, like cutting, reining, cow horse, the team penners, all them people, and the rodeo world, the barrel racers, and all that. There's no bigger, more financially well-heeled group in the United States. We should be the biggest, strongest lobby in the United States. And we should be able to make sure and shut down any BS, because the animal rights groups represent less than 2% of our population. That's what identify as animal rights type people. And they're just very noisy. They're very well funded. And the sad part to me is there was another group, the Wilberforce Institute, one of the biggest problem childs in the for the horse industry in the animal rights world is a guy named Marty Irby. He just started this group and he is targeting conservatives. He's trying to get conservatives on his side, the politicians. We have to counter that. I have to be able to have the money to go to DC and sit down with all these people, especially after an election like coming up, whether, with all the new congressional leaders and Senate leaders, putting the presidency aside. I have to go in and educate all of those people and say, hey, here we are. When somebody brings this bullshit up, you call us because we'll give you the true facts. And that all takes money. It takes time and it takes money. And I've got great people like you coming on to help out, and other people in the rodeo world that are coming on to help out. I've got some wonderful people, brilliant people that I want to build this thing into something that lasts way past me. I don't want this to be my deal. I want it to be like an NRA, and it just keeps going on and on. But more functionally sound than the NRA is right now. So,
Well, and it was funny you brought up the NRA, because that's exactly what I was just thinking of as you were describing what has to happen. Because many of us have or still are members of the NRA because we are enthusiastic about our Second Amendment rights. And this is that organization is out there and should be protecting our Second Amendment rights, and they represent us in a menagerie of ways, just as y'all are the group that are representing our Western way of life. And so that we can continue doing that, so that there's not overstepping regulations and all of these things that we've already discussed. But people have to understand, if we've supported the NRA, an organization that stands for this cause, Western justice is standing for the cause of our Western way of life and our right to be able to ride horses. And it's just synonymous to the fact that we need to get behind it, because it's nothing foreign. This is nothing new. It's just a fight that we haven't had to fight before. And it's, unfortunately, it's on our doorstep at this point. And it's either we're going to do something about it or we're going to wish we did.
Right. And that's a big thing that I like to talk about too, is once the genie is out of the bottle, it's really hard to get back in. And if we keep letting the genie out of the bottle on this and that, little things here and there, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And now, I mean, down the road, it's going to be to where we're not doing anything we're wanting to do. We're going to have to be, you know, like during Prohibition, making whiskey, having our horse shows in a hiding place. You know,
Right.
and the Charros used to have to do that until they started getting in line and doing, changing some things and really doing a lot of good stuff. And now the Charros are a big part of our coalition. So we've got all the Latino groups now involved in our Western Sports Industry Coalition. And I'm a big believer in building coalitions. So I know all the guys at NRA. I know lots of guys from several different organizations that are all have a lot of the same. Well, let me put it this way: anything that affects the wildlife or the gun movement or any of that stuff that comes out of USDA, EPA, or the Interior Department, any of that, it all affects mining. It affects the lumber industry. It affects oil and gas. It affects ranching. All of those things coexist in a lot of those problems that come out of those agencies. So I'm able to build coalitions where I have guys from fire prevention working, or forest fire, the guys that put the fires out. We can get um, the mining industries, the oil and gas, and get all of those groups to come together. And it works so well because they can go at an issue, maybe the same issue that the ranchers are dealing with some kind of regulation, and we go at it from different directions and then all come together and go, here's the solution to this.
Mm.
So it works very well. That's what I mean. We've done it multiple times at state level in different scenarios, state level, federal level, and it works really good. But bringing everybody together is the hard part. It's like
Absolutely.
herding cats. So even in our own industry, bringing this coalition together where PBR and PRCA and all of these groups for the Western Sports Industry Coalition are all together because they're competing organizations. They don't usually work together, but we've had them together for 4 years now in that coalition, and it's worked very well.
Well, I think people got to realize that we got to get over this scarcity mentality. And this isn't about Joe Blow horse trainer and the next horse trainer, the fair and this fair competing to each other for business. This is about us coming together to keep our industry alive. And we all have that in mind. It doesn't matter whether you ride dressage horses or you ride hunter jumper horses or thoroughbreds, or even in the Western way of life, whether it's trail riders, cutters, reiners, cow horses, like all of us want what's best for our horses. Like we want the very best care. We want the very best lifestyle for our horses. And we want to continue this lifestyle. And it sounds so simple, but people got to drop the egos and drop the semantics and leave all this other clutter stuff behind, because it's not that complicated. It's, do we want to still be able to continue this way of life or not? Because the opposition against us, their sole focus is they don't want us to be able to do any of it.
Right.
Right. It's not just whether we can put steel shoes or aluminum shoes on our horse, and it's not whether we can use a treeless saddle or full quarter horse bar weighted saddle on our horse. Like it's not that detailed. It's a way of life. They want it to go away. And I think those of us that are within the industry, when a lot of people get to talking about it, they get caught up on these little details that's not even really part of the bigger picture. It's just, do we want to come together to keep this thing alive? And whether it's PBR, PRCA, and it's like, listen, guys, like you can run your businesses and your organizations completely different ways. You can do it however the hell you want to. At the end of the day, you still need to be able to legally be able to do it. So we need to come together and move forward. And I mean, I don't want that to like, I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's literally that simple of people just stop fumbling over the small stuff that gets in the way of action and going, we want this industry to be around. We need to come together. I don't care if whether it's the egos or personal personas of like, oh, they support this or they support that. It's like, to hell with it. We all need to come together behind this one cause, which is we want this industry to still be alive for ourselves in the next 2 years, 5 years, but then for the next generation too.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. That I mean, it's I couldn't said it better. It's very um right. A prime example is when the whole Western or the whole horse industry went against the Tennessee Walkers, like I said earlier. And they went after the Tennessee Walkers instead of saying, "Hey, clean up your shit and get this stuff done and deal with it, or we're going to come in and start jerking your chain a little bit." They allowed the USDA to come in and do what they did, and that was the door opening. And that was a bunch of lobbyists. There's a bunch of people that are in that world that have nothing to do with horses. Wayne Pacelle was the biggest one from the Humane Society. He was the leader of the Humane Society for 20 some years. And he said it. He let it out. And one of my favorite quotes to tell people that he said was, we could get rid of all domestic animals. We could eradicate all domestic animals one generation and out. So no more breeding of domestic animals. He was talking about dogs, cats, horses, domestic animals, all food animals, one generation and out, and it could all be done. That's what they want. That's what the head of the Humane Society of the United States said. And it's a very, famous quote that he probably wishes he'd never said, but he never even owned it. He's never had a dog or a cat. The guy we're fighting in LA, Last Chance for Animals, that's been pushing this deal, has even said he's never owned a dog or a cat or never had one. I've been in, had he tries to say, owning animals is bad, so he doesn't want to call it that. But he's never had a dog or a cat, and never had any kind of animal. But he stared into the eyes of a feral dog in downtown LA, and the dog spoke to him and told him he had to. Yeah, that's the guy that is running the animal rights group, the biggest animal rights groups in Los Angeles. So that's what we're up against, that mentality.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
are the best stewards of our animals.
Mm-hmm. Well, we actually
So,
know them. I think
yeah,
that's pretty simple, right? We actually know their wants, their needs, their desires. We know how to take care of them. These other folks are clueless, and so they push an emotional agenda to get other people on board, right? And like you were saying, to the point of talking with whichever transition team does come into effect here next week, is you've got to be at the table. You've got to be able to have these conversations, and one of my favorite little phrases that I share with people is together we rise. Like together we rise as an industry, and we have to come together behind this bigger purpose that we're in. And if we get so caught up on, you were talking about how the Tennessee Walkers kind of got left hung out to dry there. And I don't want to open this can of worms on this particular conversation because I think it could really dovetail into a much deeper one. But you from what I understood you saying is, yeah, sure, we could have gone into the Tennessee walking horse world as a horse industry collective and said, hey, you guys need to clean your act up and fix some of this stuff. And we've got your back, but you guys got to clean some stuff up. That way, this doesn't progress and end up in a situation like they ended up in. But no, the horse industry turned their back on them and said, good luck, guys. We'll see you later. And there's other disciplines that I'm not going to bring up right now that probably do need some cleaning up of within the horse industry. And the thing is that we can do that progressively, right? Like we can go to our fellow horsemen and say, hey, it's 2024, about to be 2025. We know better ways to go about doing this. Let's move this thing forward for the benefit of our horses.
right.
Not for legal semantics sakes, but because there is a better way to do these things, and we can hold each other accountable. And then to the legal fund, to all these legislators, we can show them through evidence like, hey, we are self-policing our industry and improving things continually. And it makes these animal right. I would think, maybe this is naive, but it would start to make them way more obsolete if Western justice had the support of 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people on a regular basis, and we did better at communicating without people getting freaking butt hurt and feelings hurt over saying we need to improve this industry for the benefit of our horses, which we all can get behind. We all can agree with that,
Sure.
but people have to have some uncomfortable conversations.
Well, to go back to your point about the people doing the right thing to clean up their own industry, the only reason, or the only horse event or horse related event or animal related event that isn't regulated by the HPA, the Horse Protection Act, is rodeo. And you know why that is? Because they did, since the 70s, they started working on new laws, new rules, and they started doing all this stuff within their own organization and proved it. They spent a lot of money in DC proving that they were doing that, and they were the best stewards of their animals, and they were taking care of them. Rodeo is the only thing not regulated under the Horse Protection Act, and it's because of that, because of their proactive work. The rest of the horse industry didn't do that. They had the American Horse Council throwing the Tennessee Walkers under the bus to the point where they joined forces with the animal rights groups, which I will never join forces with the animal rights groups. I'm not going to go. People say, well, go sit and negotiate with them. There's no negotiating with those people. They do not negotiate. They will come at you, and they will keep coming at you, and they'll pick away at you and keep taking little pieces all the time. And you have to just put your foot down and say, no, we are the best stewards of our animals. We know what animal welfare is and what animal rights is two totally different things. And just like in Colorado right now, there's another proposition in Colorado going to, or a Supreme Court case, I should say, in Colorado that's going to try to give another elephant, like Happy the elephant, that we finally stopped that one. But the whole anthropomorphism deal, they're trying to get this elephant to have rights and have a custodial attorney to basically get him removed from the zoo. And that's what they're trying to do. They got a case in the Colorado Supreme Court that's going to be heard to be able to say whether or not this elephant has the right to the same human rights and legal rights as a human. So,
and people got to realize that those types of legal battles are happening. That's a real life story.
And it happens all the time. And there's a lot of these things that happen in DC that I can't ever talk about at the time. Like I think I explained to you one time about the PACT Act that President Trump signed, and it was prevent all cruelty and torture tactics. Sounds good, but there was a provision in there before we got it stripped that said you couldn't weigh more than 10% of the animal's body weight you were riding. So at 230 pounds, I'd have to ride a 2,300-pound draft horse.
Yeah.
So those kind of things happen all the time. We don't talk about it. We're on top. Western justice on top of that stuff all the time. So we're constantly fighting and trying to stop all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, and those are the types of things that get woven into those pieces of legislature that you guys are there to have attorneys and people read through to go, hey, we gotta go get this taken and stricken out, because they're passing bills that are miles long, and there's these little subset sections that get woven in there to keep people happy. And we've got to have y'all's team to actually catch that stuff, because we'd all be screwed if that 10% rule passed.
And you got to have the background and the knowledge. When you read through something like that, there's wording matters, verbiage matters, and there could be the most almost seemingly benign sentence in a bill. And if you don't have the background and you don't know that this is where they're going to go with that when they get done, this is somebody's going to interpret this 5 years, 1 year, 10 years down the road. as this. So that line has to be stripped out of there, or it's got to be clarified explicitly to be exactly that. And those are the kind of things that we do that people, I mean, I don't know how many times I've done it, hundreds, hundreds over the last, 12, 14, 16 years.
So is there, I'm going to wrap this thing up here, David, so that way we can get this and people listen to the whole thing. Is there anything
Yeah.
else that you think is really, really pressing that people need to know and be aware of when it comes into, choosing between these administrations and choosing towards the future of our industry in this Western way of life?
We are without a doubt at a crossroads right now. And like I said, we're either going to be fighting and fighting like hell, or we're going to be able to be proactive and fix things that we need to do. So there's I mean there's a whole myriad of issues. Gold. I mean there's a lot going on right now, and we just have to be vigilant and diligent about it. And either way, we're going to be busy. And one of the things that happens that that I don't want people to get complacent. If you're a Trump fan and he gets elected, don't be complacent, because what happens is people let out their air. They finally let go. And they're like, oh, he's going to take care of everything. He can't take care of everything if he doesn't know everything. You think about the presidency and how much he has to work with, or whoever it is has to work with. If you don't have somebody that can bring that cream to the top and that issue to the top of the pile, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to pay attention to it, and some bureaucrat's going to decide our fate. So that's the key to what we're doing. So even if Trump gets in there, don't sit back and rest thinking that it's all going to be okay and we'll be able to do it. We still need people. We need help. We're going to need just as much money and just as much, we have to spend just as much time, if not more, if he's there, than if Kamala's there. And if
But it sounds like
Kamala's
to me
there,
too,
I don't get.
even if Trump does get elected, you guys get get to be more proactive in terms of getting rid of some things that might be passing, but also it's a prime period to actually be moving things forward and getting some structure in place that way that there's protection for this industry because we're going to be facing another election in 4 years from now. So it's not just like, okay, we get to reverse a few things and get it back to being cushy. Like it's an opportunity to get things locked and loaded and really secure as much as possible. So that way, this way of life, it makes it harder for the people that want to see this go away. It makes it harder for them to be able to destroy it.
Right. And the stronger we are, the better. I mean, the more we get and the stronger we are, the more influence we're going to have on either side, whichever administration's in there the next 4 years. The stronger we are and the bigger we are. DC pays attention. That's why I had people when I left Protect the Harvest, I had two of my bigger donors. It said they would just fund me to be the lobbyist for the horse industry, for the Western horse farm. And I sat and I went over it, and I wrote down pros and cons of doing a organization, or just being a lobbyist. Being a lobbyist would have made me a really nice paycheck every month. Just being a lobbyist, and I wouldn't have had to deal with all the things I'm dealing with. I'd be able to deal with all the issues, but not the building of an organization. I wouldn't have to build it. But I waited it out, and for me, an organization that's whole and big and strong is way more powerful than just one guy going to DC and running his mouth all the time, and going and poking around. That's way more powerful. So that's why I started Western Justice, why we got going and why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, we gotta build this thing. We're 4 years old. We started it'll be 5 in March of next year. And we're growing strong. We're very organically, because I don't waste a lot of money on advertising and doing all that. So we're very issue based right now. So
Yeah. And
whatever
people need to
money
know
comes
too
into.
that, yeah, Western Justice alone is 4 years old, but you've been in this fight since what, 2009? or earlier
Six,
through
2006. Yeah,
2006, right?
yeah,
So even if people are just now first learning the Western justice and what you're doing, you've been in this fight for almost for 18 years, nearly 20 years
yeah,
now doing this. And you were with Protect the Harvest, which a lot of us do know what Protect the Harvest was. And then now it's grown into and progressed into Western justice. And so it's while Western justice might be new and in its infancy,
right.
you've been in the fight for decades at this point, on behalf of the Western lifestyle. And so that way, it's important that we have somebody like yourself at the forefront who's been in DC. You have these relationships, and we can actually move things forward and not lose ground. And before you go, I want to say thank you for giving David and I your listening ear as we went through this conversation at such a pressing time to preserve this lifestyle that all of us know, like, and love and want to keep around. Not only does preserving this Western lifestyle depend on us coming together and listening and having these conversations, but it also depends on us coming together and taking action. So, right as you click off this episode, before you go any further in your day, I want to encourage you to go down in the show notes down below and click on that link that says westernjustice.info. They have annual memberships for as low as $25 a year, up to their top end one at $1,000. And if you want to donate more than that, you can certainly reach out to them directly because they are on the good fight to keep this Western way of life. And talk is cheap. We have to have talk to have awareness, but it follows by action. And so I want to encourage you right now, before you do anything else, to go in there and at least do that $25 donation. So that way it can go towards fighting and keeping this Western way of life. We actually need people to not just talk about this stuff, but actually come together and put our money where our mouth is and stand up for this way of life that we want to preserve. And so thank you for listening. Thank you in advance for taking action. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode.